I'm Anastasia Chatzka. I'm a fashion designer, pattern maker, and sewing educator, and I'm so happy you're here sewing along with me today. Today, I'm going to show you how to sew a placket the easiest way ever. Plackets can be really tricky, but this method makes it super easy. Plackets can be on sleeves, they can be on necklines, they could be on a skirt, they can be in so many different places, and this method is going to be so easy. To create your placket, you're going to need your strip of fabric you want to use for the placket. It could be any width. Mine today is going to be 7/8 of an inch wide after it's all folded, which I'll explain in a minute. And then you're also going to need your project. Today I'm going to be putting placket down the front of a dress. Today, the strip of fabric I'm going to be using is 7/8 of an inch wide when it's finished. So mine is a piece of bias binding. You really want to cut this on the bias so it's going to wrap around the edge real nice. You could try it on the straight grain, but it's going to be a little trickier for you. Let me show you how I created this bias strip of fabric for the placket. So I have my bias strip here and I have it open. So you'll notice that we have a crease in the center, and on both sides of that, it's 7/8 and 7/8. And then we have a 1/4 inch on both sides. So that 1/4 inch is gonna fold in, so we have a nice clean edge. And then when we're all done, our placket is going to be 7/8 of an inch wide. So this piece of fabric is cut on the bias, so there's a little bit of stretch. So this is gonna wrap around the edge of our placket opening really nice. If you cut this on the straight grain and it's not sewn absolutely perfectly, it's going to be a little off. So I highly suggest cutting this piece of fabric on the bias. Again, you can make this any width you want, 1/2 inch, 2 inches, 7/8, 3/8, whatever you want. Mine today is going to be 7/8 of an inch wide. What really matters is that you have it folded and ironed properly, so that way the next step, super easy to sew on. So let's do it. So in the front of my bodice, I have marked how wide my placket's gonna be, which is 7/8, and how long I would like it. So I have this marked, I have a center line marked, and then I also have a little triangle here at the bottom coming up from the corners 1/2 inch. Now this is going to be our cutting line. We're gonna cut down the center and we're gonna cut on the legs of the triangle. You might be wondering, why 1/2 inch? Well, really we just need something to sew on, so you wanna make sure that it's not too small. Otherwise, we're not gonna have anything to sew on when we get down to the bottom of the placket here. So make sure your triangle is big enough to sew on. Now grab your scissors and we are gonna cut the front of this dress open. So I'm cutting right down the center of my placket that I've drawn here, stopping at the tip of the triangle and cutting down the legs to the very corner of this rectangle. So yours should look something like that. So part of the trick to this method is getting that cut in there, and then we take our fabric and we pull it straight. How cool is this? So now that we have it nice and straight, what we want to do is place our binding on there. Now these little points that we cut into are going to be so important when we're sewing, because we have to make sure that when we're sewing, we're just sewing right outside of it. If you sew too far outside of it, you're going to get a pleat, and if you don't sew far enough, well, you're going to have a hole. So we want to make sure that we're catching this little slash mark here when we sew. If you're enjoying this video so far on plackets, make sure you subscribe to Sew Anastasia and hit the notification bell so you know when all the new videos come out. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for watching today. Now let's get back to more plackets. So now what we're gonna do is open up our binding, and we wanna make sure that our sewing line is going to hit that little slash there. So I'm going to line up the fold of my binding there, and then I can go ahead and fold this back and pin it down. So we're making sure that we are pinning our crease line so that way it lines up with that slash mark. Okay, so now we have it pinned up, and it should look something like that on the front. And then on the back, it's going to look something like that. And you can see that triangle that we created when we made our slash marks. Now we're gonna sew down that crease right there in the binding. Again, we're just gonna be sewing in that little crease that's right there. Make sure you back stitch. Make sure you take out your pins before you get to them. And just follow this straight line all the way down. It's always a good idea to double check when you get to those little slash marks that you are right at the edge of it. And you'll notice right now we're sewing over that triangle. That's why it's so important that that triangle is big enough so that way you have something to sew on. When you get to the end, backstitch and cut. So let's take a close look at what we just created and then we'll go over the next step. So you can see right where we stitched and you can see when we got to those little clip marks, how close we are to that little clip mark. Now that is so important so that way our next step ends up nice and smooth. Now what we're gonna do is fold our seam allowance in towards the binding and then we're gonna fold the binding over. And we wanna make sure that the edge of the binding is coming right over that existing stitch, like 1/8 of an inch, because we don't wanna see that stitch on the outside of our garment. And we're just gonna work our way all the way down, pinning this closed. Okay, now we have our placket here all pinned on. So now what we need to do is a little edge stitch right on the edge where that fold is. So I'm gonna be stitching really close to the edge here. Make sure that you back stitch in the beginning and work your way all the way down. When you get to the end, make sure you back stitch and cut. This has been so easy, right? So easy. But next, we have to make sure that we fold this properly. Otherwise, it could go all wrong, but it won't because I'm gonna show you exactly what to do. So right now, the outside of your project should look like this with the binding on it. Okay, so now what we need to do is fold it. I've done a little pre-ironing so that way it's real easy to see. So we are going to lay our bodice flat and then all we need to do is fold a crease in it this way, 45-degree angle, and then fold it back. And there we go. We've got a placket, but we're not done because we have to sew. So we've got to sew our bottom down. You can choose to just sew the very tip down. You can sew the tip down and then sew a box above it. You could also edge stitch this other side first if you wanted. So you have some options on how you want it to look. And you could also edge stitch the bottom edge down here as well. So again, you'll see we folded it back on a 45-degree angle and then just folded the placket on top of itself. So now what we want to do is stitch down the bottom of the placket. So I'm going to stitch down the bottom and I'm going to make a little box too. I'm going to start about 3/4 of an inch up, making sure that I'm on the very edge there so it matches the other side. Going to do a little back stitch and then come all the way down to the edge. So I'm 1/8 of an inch away, leave my needle in, lift my foot up and turn. Leave my needle in and turn when I'm at the point. Now I'm going to come back up on this side 3/4 of an inch. Now what I need to do is leave my needle in, turn, and come back over. Now if you want, you could be done there, or we can go ahead and make a little box down here. Let's see, for this dress, I think I'm just gonna leave it right where it's at. So I'm just gonna go ahead and make sure I do a little back stitch, and we're done. We did it. We have a super cute placket now on the front of this bodice, and it was so easy to do. Let's take a close look at it. So we've got our binding sewn on, we have our beautiful edge stitches, we sewed down the bottom, we have our placket on the inside, which gives you a nice finished edge right here. And if we turn it over, it is nice and finished in the back as well. So this is a beautiful, easy way to put on a placket. A few tips when using this method: make sure your fabric's not too thick because it has to overlap at the bottom quite a bit. And make sure you're not putting in a really thin placket, because the really thin placket with this overlapping fabric in the bottom is probably going to be a little too bulky. So make sure you're doing a wider placket and using a thinner fabric. And if you are doing both of those things, this method is going to work out beautifully for you. Imagine a cool bodice with like a ton of plackets on it, tons of buttons coming down in all different lengths. Sounds very 1940s to me. I think I just might try it out. Thanks so much for watching Sewing Anastasia today on how to put in a placket the easiest way ever. If you have any questions on it, make sure you leave them down below and I will get back with you as soon as I can. If you enjoyed this video today, make sure you give it a thumbs up, give it some applause, and I'd love to know what you think of this method. So leave that down below in the comments. And if you have any tips or tricks for sewing plackets, I would love to read them, and I know everyone else would too. So leave those down below in the comments too. And if you're not already a subscriber to Sewing Anastasia, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when all my new videos come out. We put about 2 videos out a week right now. So much sewing content for you. And also make sure you subscribe on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok so that way we can stay connected and creative together. And I also teach sewing classes in person and virtually, so make sure you check those out at sewinganastasia.com. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.